that's a great point. You want to have less jobs that become a job for you as a teacher because we've already got so many things on our list. And if you're creating that more work for yourself, that's when the wheels start to fall off. The next one is something that we debated a little bit before we came on and recorded.
Welcome to Rainbow Skies for New Teachers, where we're all about bite-sized tips and simple strategies for bright and busy new teachers.
If you're in your first few years of your career and want to make the rollercoaster ride of teaching more fun, streamlined and stress-free, you're in the right place.
We're Ashley and Alicia, the dynamic duo from Rainbow Sky Creations, and we're excited to be your teacher mentors on the go. There are rainbows ahead, my friend.
And together, we're unstoppable. Let's get into today's episode.
Here at Rainbow Sky Creations, we acknowledge the Darra people and the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record this podcast today, where we live, work and learn. We pay our respects to their past, present and emerging elders of this nation and supports the cultural, spiritual and educational practices of First Nations people.
Welcome back to Rainbow Skies for New Teachers. This episode is brought to you by Transform Your First Years, the membership. Doors are opening very soon. Hey, Alicia.
Hey, Ash. Here we go. Another episode about the do's and don'ts when it comes to setting up your classroom. And
now, people might be wondering why we're doing this at the end of December and not in January. But the reason is that we know lots of teachers like to get in and start preparing their classroom in January. So we want you to be able to come back to this episode and listen to it and take notes and have it here as a resource for when you do go and set up your classroom, whether it's in the beginning of January, the middle, or the very, very end, whatever floats your boat.
Or I could imagine there's a little bit of organised Ashley who would be like in December going, what can I do now to get ahead in January? Are you guilty of this?
You're right. There was one year that I went back to school after the last day and I spent 2 days setting up my classroom so I didn't have to go back in January at all.
And is there a reason you didn't do it the following years? Because you realised you could do it all in January?
Do you know what? Going back to school during January when everyone's on holidays, it's kind of fun. Catching up with your teacher friends, you get to know new staff members. I quite like it and it was more relaxing doing it that way for me. I still felt that even though I did that and I felt like I didn't have to go towards the end of January, I still got that anxiety going back to school anyway. So it didn't really work.
I find that any day at school that doesn't involve students is like a cruisy day. Like I feel like a bit of a professional who can go to the toilet when I want. I can eat food when I want. I can put on music and dance around but still be getting stuff done. So I always felt like PD days were a bit like that.
Same. You see everyone in their casual clothes.
Yeah. You're like those kids where they see their teacher in the supermarket and they're like, oh my gosh, what is she wearing? What has she done to her hair? And what has she got in her food trolley? What does she eat?
They exist outside of the classroom, outside of the school walls.
Yes, they do. We do not sleep under the table and pull out our little sleeping bags, FYI, children.
Maybe there's no children listening to this podcast, although I must say my own children do listen.
Yes, I could imagine. You know, they're getting to that age now where they're like, so, Mum, what do you actually do? And you'd be like, yeah, this is what I do.
They're good little cheerleaders, actually. We might have to have them on the podcast at one stage, giving a bit of student feedback.
Yes, we're all about feedback from everyone, peers, students, colleagues, you name it.
Yeah, speaking of feedback, if you have been enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review. We would be so grateful. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more the podcast goes out to new people and then new teachers can discover us and we can help them too. So we would much appreciate any sort of feedback from you in that way.
Absolutely. And what are we going to delve into first when we talk about do's and don'ts in the classroom?
Well, we've decided to break this up in 3 sections. Things you should have in your classroom when you're setting it up, things that you could consider having in your classroom when you're setting it up. And then we're going to talk about one thing that you really just don't need to stress about.
Yes.
Okay, so here are the 3 shoulds based on our experience. Alicia, do you want to hit it off with the first one?
Absolutely. I love having this in my classroom and it's a reading corner, a reading nook, or a space where there are class books where students have the access to read whatever they want during those times in the classroom where you might be at the beginning of the day or they wrap up work early or transitions. But having somewhere where students can access reading materials, I think is really important. And I think probably nowadays people would pair that up with it being classes maybe like a calming corner or just somewhere where students can regulate. And I myself have been guilty of going to my reading corner during break times and regulating myself there. So
Yes, especially when you were pregnant.
yes, or when I'd get a migraine and I'd just be like, where are those bean bags and where is something dark to put over my eyes? And I'm just going to have a moment to myself.
Our reading corner is really important because really as primary school teachers, literacy is that base for us. So having a spot in the classroom where students can access books that aren't just leveled readers or phonemic readers, but books that they can really enjoy and get that love of. And you don't need to buy or purchase those books. You can borrow them from the school library and add them to your classroom library. You can get kids to bring in books from home and donate them that way. You'll often just inherit books in your classroom. I do recommend though, if the books are starting to look really tatty, they're falling apart, get rid of them. Just keep books that are fresh and that children are going to want to go and read. Now, this is a little bit extra. I'm going to admit it. But one way that I really love to organize the books in my classroom is by color order. So I look at the color on the spine and I order them in rainbow order. Now that sounds a bit crazy, but hear me out. It is really easy to organize and it's really easy for the students to organize and it looks good. I used to order them in height and it just always ended up in a big fat mess and it just didn't work. Since doing this, it's been a lot better.
I can agree to that. And I think as well, talking about the different types of readers, if you've got things like picture books, novels, or you've got magazines, sometimes like magazines might go better in like a crate rather than putting them into your color-coded section. So also when you're looking at organizing them and the color system works immensely, also have a think about what is that type of book or reading material and would it go better in a separate section in your reading nook. And I think that's the main thing as educators is we want to create a celebration of reading. Like reading isn't a chore. It's something that we get to enjoy and get to do that takes us to another place. It broadens our horizons. It's a way for us to learn new things. So creating a space that you would love to go to, like whether it's having a nice little display, you've got fairy lights, bean bags. I used to just have an array of cushions in a section where students could just pull out. And as well in my classroom, especially when you've got lots of kids and you have a small space, you can spread out your reading space, like especially if you're doing a drop everything and read time in the day, where they can just grab a cushion and go lie under the tables. So think a bit outside the square when it comes to what your reading space and celebration of reading may look like in your classroom.
Yeah, for sure. Having a flexible seating arrangement in your classroom might mean that kids don't necessarily need to go to a reading corner, but they're able to access books and go and sit somewhere else in the classroom that really suits them. That's a great point.
Yeah. Love a little reading nook. I am guilty of reading every night before I go to bed. I feel like I can't sleep if I don't read my book.
I love reading too. Alicia and I used to share books when we lived in Dubai.
Yes.
We both love a good read. Actually, something I used to do with my year 3 and 4 classrooms is we'd read first thing in the morning and I would try and bring my own book and sit and read with them. And it was a really great way of just modeling that behavior, but showing them that I loved reading too. And it was a really nice time for all of us together. And I would really recommend that for any teacher that teaches older students if you love to read.
Yeah. Look, I caught my 3-year-old reading the latest Bunnings magazine. She's like, check this out, Mum. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you are my daughter.
Well, readers are leaders. Okay, so the first should is setting up some place to access books, a reading corner or something like that. The second should is having an organized space for your papers because as teachers, we collect copious amounts of paper.
This is true. Now, if you haven't listened to episode 4, the biggest mistakes we made as new teachers, we do talk a bit about this as well when it comes to organizing your papers. So you might want to check out that episode where we dive a bit deeper into this. But think about your space in the classroom that is designated to where you like have your laptop set up. You might have a teacher desk or some teachers I know don't have desks. They find a space in the classroom to work. But have a think about where do you want your papers to be stored for like your planning programs, papers that are coming in. If you're preparing work for students for the week, where are you going to store those papers or how are you going to store them so that if you're not in the classroom, whoever's taking over the class would be able to find them. So that is a really important part to focus on when you're getting your classroom set up for the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, it makes it functional. I am a big advocate for the in trays. So having a few in trays, I usually like to keep them behind my desk and then I have the work that needs to be done for that particular week, work that needs to be photocopied, any other random bits. And I always have one for assessments as well. But Alicia did mention back in one of our last episodes that if you want to get an in tray for practically no money, well, actually it is free, go down to the photocopy room and get the lid of the box that the photocopy paper comes in, turn that over, and then that's an in tray and your A4 papers fit in it perfectly.
Yeah. The other thing to consider is I always like to put my desk somewhere where there was a pin board or a display board. So on there you could put your, like I would cut sometimes a plastic sleeve in half, and if kids went to the nurse and I needed to get a slip, I could just pull them out. I also would have it there, the class list. I would always allocate my students a number that they use throughout the year. So that was up there on the board. And then I'd also put my timetable. I would have that up on the board too. And I'd also have things like contact numbers and medical, but I would have it in a way that it was covered up, but I could access it really quickly. But I know some people as well would get like an A4 display folder and they would slot in that important like emergency number contact information that they might take with them on an excursion. And also up there, I might have my reading groups just for me to be able to see it. It wouldn't be huge. It would just be like a little slip color coded and I could quickly look up and see what I'd name my groups and what things I was allocating for them.
Duty rosters.
Yes.
Yard duty, you need that up there too. All of those things, they do come automated after a while, but having them there as a reminder and easy to find is important because things happen throughout the day and all of a sudden you're rushing out to yard duty and you don't need to know where you're going.
And it would be an overview of my term where I just had each subject and just one word going, we are doing multiplication. We are focusing on introducing narrative writing. We are leading into our topic on science to do with chemicals. So just something really quickly and I could check off and say, we did that. We covered that spelling focus. We covered that grammar focus. So it just kind of kept me accountable and it was just easy for me to see and pull off the wall, as well as my little weekly checklist of things I do every week. So find a display board where you can put your things up. If that's how you like to work, or just chuck it all in a folder you can grab from behind you.
Yeah. Good one. Okay, the last should is a door display. So something up on your classroom door that creates a safe and welcoming environment for the students to enter. Now, we always talk about when you're setting up your classroom at the very beginning of the year, it's great to have the students' names in a few different places because then it becomes more of a personalized space for them. They're walking in and they're seeing their name and they realize that they're part of this classroom community, and setting something up on your door, especially with your children's names, is a really good place to start. Back in my very first years of teaching, it was actually a real fad. You know how you see those teacher fads on Instagram now? This was a fad back in the early 2000s. And I know that teachers probably still do this, but on the very first day of school, we would take a photo of the students and then we would get them professionally printed. So we'd go like to Kodak or Harvey Norman, get them printed out, laminate them, and then put them on the door. So it would say, welcome to kindergarten blue. And then it would have all the kids' photos, which was a really nice way of welcoming them and showing that the classroom was theirs.
Yes.
Now we have advanced. And there are so many great things out there as far as door displays go. But you can have their names, you could have a photo of them, you could have a theme that matches with your classroom theme if you want to go that far. But it's a great way to set up, get students' names up at least once in your classroom before you do anything else in your room to set up.
Yes. Where could you put class names before the students rock up? You could do a birthday display and have it up, but I usually like to have the months up and we would have an activity where we would put our names onto the display. You could have them name labels on the desk.
Yep, on tubs or where they put in their school bags.
Yeah, their lockers or their hooks. So there are many places where you can display their names if you choose to create a door display together when you get into the start of the first week, which is what I would like to do, is we would create a class display together. But definitely make sure you have a door display. We highly recommend it where it reflects the students in your classroom.
For sure. Okay, so there are 3 things that you should do when setting up your classroom. Let's move on to some things that you could do. So they're not necessary, but there are nice things that you could maybe do when you're setting up your classroom. The first one is a wow wall. What is a wow wall?
A wow wall. Good question. A wow wall is where you display your students' learning, but it allows them to have autonomy on what is displayed on their designated space. So a lot of teachers, if they go down this path of choosing an A3 space for their students, so they can put anything from A4 up to A3 size, you could even scrap the wow wall idea if you're like, okay, that's just too hard because I know I'm not going to be consistent and getting work up, and I'm going to have students who will want to do it and won't want to do it. You could have a designated board where you have student celebration, like celebrate student learning, and where students could share anything. It could be a writing piece. It could be something that created in science. It could be a photo that they want to put up of their learning. So it's just really creating that space of celebration and that encouragement of being inquisitive, curious learners, and also allowing students to be interested in what other people are learning about in the classroom and create that atmosphere of celebrating, complimenting, positivity. So there's lots of benefits to having a wow wall.
Yeah, you need to have the space for a wow wall though, because usually you probably have seen them online where the teachers have got like a wow work or wow wall, or they've got some sort of heading, and then they've got coloured sheets of paper that are stuck to the wall, and then the students' work gets pinned on top of that. You do need a little bit of space in your classroom. I know I've worked in classrooms that definitely don't have the space for that. Remember that year 2 classroom that we worked in Dubai? Alicia, I think you took over that classroom years after I had left, and like 3 of the walls were windows.
And that's the thing too, is you want a wow wall to be really accessible to students as well. So say you've got a fishbowl classroom, but you might have wall space below that window. That's kind of a space you're not using. You might want to make that a little wow wall where students can go up themselves and add to it with a peg or with a bulldog clip, or worst case scenario, you have to quickly grab some blue tack and they stick it on. But having it somewhere they can access is really important. I found if I've created a wow wall and it's been up high and only I can access it becomes a job for me, and it becomes I run out of time to be able to do it. But if students can access it, they work together as a team to put up the work, or they come up and go, Miss, I'm going to add this to my wow wall, and you're like, great, go do it. Doesn't become a job for me.
That's a great point. You want to have less jobs that become a job for you as a teacher, because we've already got so many things on our list. And if you're creating that more work for yourself, that's when the wheels start to fall off. The next one is something that we debated a little bit before we came on and recorded. A word wall is our next could suggestion. Now, we weren't debating whether you should have vocabulary up. We both agreed, yes, there should be some sort of vocabulary up in your classroom, but we were debating on what people call it. Do they call it a word wall? Is it more of a phonics-based wall? Is it more of a vocabulary around some of that technical language that you're using in your history and your geography lessons? So no matter what you call it, having words and rich vocabulary up in your environment to help your students.
It's very important. It's a way for you to be able to encourage students to be curious about learning about words, about like, what does that mean? And it being a safe space to ask those questions. I know I was that kid who wouldn't ask what that word meant because I'd be like, oh gosh, that might just show that I'm just not smart enough. Hello, kids growing up in the 80s. But I think when you have vocabulary accessible, it creates that talking point. I know definitely when I was teaching my year 2s and we were doing a big focus on decodables and our sounds, I would have a focus of that for the term of the decodable words that we're working on, and students would add to it. When we were doing our inquiry focus, we would have 3 or 4 words up on the whiteboard that we were referring to regularly, or the science lab would have words up there like hypotheses, controlled variables that we were referring to regularly. So it became innate and they just knew that that's what that word meant and I would be using it. And students would know they'd be using it.
And then they can start using it themselves. They can start using it in their own spoken vocabulary, but then as they get more confident in their writing and they know where to refer to it, because I know a lot of kids, they get stumped when they're writing if they don't know how to spell a word, and then they just either won't use that word or they just don't know how to carry on with their writing. So it's great to offer them a place to refer to and to include some of that vocabulary that you're using in your classroom in their writing. Even in my kindergarten teacher days, I used to label basic things in the classroom. So I would have a word label for chair and whiteboard and computer and all of those sorts of things, because I knew that when the kids wanted to use those words in their writing, they would just have to go to that item and they'd be able to see it.
Yes. And speaking of writing, if you're teaching those older grades, middle primary up, or even your younger grades, like having little flip cards. Now, you don't have to laminate these, just print them on thicker paper and the students can just flip it over and be like, oh, here's other words for using for said, or here's another word I can use for a sentence starter. So if you're focusing on your different types of writing, whether it's informative reports, scientific reports, persuasive, you could have little prompts that you would put up on your interactive whiteboard or on your anchor chart. They can have it accessible to them. You have a stack little flip books that go onto a set of tables, or you might give it to them to put in their writing books for that term. So having a space to celebrate vocabulary, find what works for you and do it.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about the thing that you don't need to do, something to absolutely ditch.
Yes. I think there's a big movement on this and we support it 100%.
Yeah, let's get rid of the laminating. Not everything that goes up in your classroom when you're setting up your classroom needs to be laminated. Now, this is actually twofold. It doesn't need to be laminated, actually threefold. I'm going to give you 3 reasons. It doesn't need to be laminated because of the environment. That one is obvious. The second thing is that when things are laminated and they're up in your classroom, there's lots of windows, it often reflects and the students can't really see what's on the poster anyway. And the third reason is that it takes so much time to laminate things.
No one wants to get RSI from having to laminate and cut so many different things. And we have some alternatives for you. So if you're there going, but what do we do instead when it comes to laminating? We've got some suggestions.
Yes. The first suggestion is to print on thicker paper or cardstock. By printing on that thicker paper, it just is that little bit more durable and you can get cardstock in all of the colors that you need and it's perfect. It goes up on the wall and it doesn't have that reflection.
And if you're like, where do I get this paper from? If you have a classroom budget, just adding it into your budget. And then if you're still like, well, I don't really have a classroom budget, then you go find your nearest best friend, the art teacher or administration staff and just go, hi, I'm just wanting to, save the world. I'm wondering if you had some thicker card I could use. And I would be using the thicker card for, your things like displays or like the little flip charts we were talking about for vocabulary. Or if you're printing off games, you can print it on thicker card and it'll last longer than you realize. But we have some other suggestions.
Yeah. I was just going to say, who would say no to saving the world?
Yes. Who would? We want to talk to you. We're going to bone to pick with you. No.
So when you've got games and things, putting them in reusable plastic pockets, I've picked some of these up from like the $2 shop, or you can pick them up from Kmart, popping them in and then using a whiteboard marker for the students to work on them. And that's great too, because then you're not photocopying a whole class set of worksheets and things. The kids can reuse them over and over for groups or rotations and things like that.
That pairs up with like the right and white sleeves that I know I've purchased from Officeworks for my kids. And the cool thing is what I love about like plastic folders, wipe and right sleeves is that you can put 2 bits of paper in. So you've got an activity on both sides. So they can just do one activity and flip it over and do the other. Or if you choose to put a game in there, they can flip between the games, especially if you're differentiating with different levels for students to access.
The next one is putting games and activities in display folders. Again, they can work through those. So if they finish a particular game or a particular activity, they can flick it over and work on the next one. That's one thing that is going to help you when it comes to group time and rotations, keeping them busy so that you can work with your small group.
Very good suggestion. We did that, especially when we were setting up homework. We didn't send home worksheets. We sent home games. So each kid had a display folder and we would add in games that we'd played throughout the year so they could take them home and play them with their families. And the ones they really liked, you'd know because they're like, we took it out and we can't find it. Can I get another copy? But it was just a nice way of not having to laminate it and for them to have access to a selection of games that they can play with their family or play at school.
Yeah. And you know what? That's also a little bit of a time-saving hack because then you don't have homework to mark. And how bad is it marking homework when it's just been like rushed like crazy at home? A parent hasn't even looked over it. And you think, what am I doing? Why am I spending all this time marking this when no time and effort's gone into it and it doesn't really have much of a learning outcome?
Yeah, there's so much you can learn with playing games as well. I'm not saying you can't learn things from doing homework, like in terms of focus and independence, but with games, you've got that element of collaboration, competitiveness, accepting that sometimes you might not win and it might not feel okay, but you'll realize it is okay. So
Yeah,
we love games.
we do. We're not major fans of the old traditional homework here at Rainbow Sky.
Yeah, absolutely not. But I think that's for another podcast, maybe episode.
I think it is too. Let's not get into that now.
The next one is a really cool one that you showed me, Ash, is getting a clear clipboard and using it as a dry eraser board. So rather than going, hey, I need to order a set of 30 mini whiteboards, I could do a 2-for-1 deal and get clipboards and have them clear so you can slot pieces of paper behind it and then get your whiteboard eraser and write on top of it. Win-win.
Yeah, it's genius. It is a win-win. The final suggestion we have is to use just paper-only displays on your walls or with games or anything else that you would normally laminate. Just stick to the paper. Yes, it may get a little bit more ruined as it's going through all those little hands and kids are using it, but often we replace things at the end of the year anyway. So really, you're not losing out.
No, I do have one more suggestion.
Go for it.
That I was just using with my Play-Doh mats with my kids was our school was a bit guilty of having students order plastic sleeve boxes where each student got 100 plastic sleeves. And you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with 3,000 plastic sleeves? Because they used them for portfolios. Please, if you still do portfolios, I just want to hear from you. Like, how are you going? Are you doing okay?
I know. The flashbacks are real right now.
So
hopefully some of our new teachers don't even know what portfolios are.
No, they're like, e-portfolios. Who prints paper nowadays? What's wrong with you? So I would get the plastic sleeves and I'd put games in there or like, look, I've got Play-Doh mats for my little ones at the moment. So the Play-Doh would go on the plastic sleeve without me having to laminate a sheet of paper that I know I would only use for a handful of times. And that pairs up with if you've gone and purchased, say, you might have a collection of A4 size like Ziploc bags. The same goes for those. You can actually put things inside your Ziploc bags and use it in that sense. So there are alternatives for materials you might already have in the classroom that you're like, what am I going to do with this? We've got one final tip when it comes to this is how do you get the whiteboard marker off your clipboard, off your white and right sleeve? And there are two things that I found that works.
And guys, these are genius. So stop and take notes because Alicia taught me this and I've never looked back.
So one is you go to your local supermarket. So here, you pop into your Coles, your Woolies, and you grab some eucalyptus spray. It's kind of like a 2-for-1 because it is also good as a germ killer. So you just get your eucalyptus spray or you can get it in the bottle and you can use that to clean your white and right sleeves. And you can also use it to clean your whiteboard as well. If you find you've got some spots that just aren't cleaning up nicely, just get out your eucalyptus spray. These were the days where, and they are still the days where kids will probably come to school with your hand sanitizer. And we ended up with quite a backlog of hand sanitizer. And my year 3s discovered this was the best way to clean their whiteboards. They would shine up so nice and brand spanking new. So if you've got a big secret stash of hand sanitizer, it could become your 2-in-1 of germ killer and cleaning off your white and right sleeves.
I love that. What clever little people.
I love innovative kids. So good.
Same. So they were some things to help you get set up in your classroom. I've got one more little gem of something to do, and I'm sure we will talk about this further in January, but something to do when you're setting up your classroom is that when you start putting things up on the wall, sit down in one of the students' seats and just take it in from their perspective. I think sometimes as adults, we put things up, we think it's in a good position, but we need to remember that really it's for the eyes of the students. So I always recommend sitting down in one of the student seats and looking at it from their perspective.
That's an excellent suggestion.
Alicia, do you want to give us a little wrap up? What are some of the shoulds, coulds and don'ts?
Here we go. 3 shoulds: a reading corner, an organised space for your papers and a dot display. Your 2 coulds are a wow wall or a student space to share their learning. And the second one was a word wall or vocabulary wall. And the one thing that you can ditch is laminating your papers.
Yes. Now, before you go, if you are a new teacher, we have got something exciting for you. We have got a quiz to find out what sort of teacher you are. Who doesn't love a quiz?
Yes, I would love to know what my teacher type is. It should be the highest outcome.
So we have linked it to our teacher quiz in the show notes if you want to go and check it out and find out what your teacher type is.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for listening to this episode. It has been an absolute privilege to share our teacher thoughts and all that jazz when it comes to learning.
So come back next week. Next week will actually be Christmas Day, but we have got a fun little episode for you to enjoy, perhaps not on Christmas Day. Maybe you'll be eating pudding. But perhaps in a few days after that, you'll be back ready to listen to a podcast and we've got a fun episode.
Yeah, we've got a fun episode where we talk about teacher, you are not alone. What are the craziest things you've done in the classroom that you think you've only done? But I can guarantee you thousands of other teachers have done it too. So come join us and have a listen to that episode and have a laugh with us.
Until then, there are rainbows ahead, my friend.
And together we're unstoppable.